Hey everyone, let's just jump right in, shall we? Today's explainer is an absolute deep dive into a classic age-old debate, moral purity versus political pragmatism. And we're going to unpack this by looking at one of the most counterintuitive, meticulously argued historical comparisons ever put to paper, Plutarch's synkrisis. We're going to zero in on two brilliant, highly controversial historical figures who ended up sharing surprisingly similar fates, but man, they operated with wildly different styles. So buckle up because this is going to be a fascinating masterclass in leadership, betrayal, and the often hidden costs of human nature. Okay, here is our game plan for today. We'll start with Section 1, introducing our contenders, the serpent and the bear. Then we'll hit Section 2, the 7 axes of comparison. From there, Section 3 reveals Plutarch's surprising verdict, followed by Section 4, the Shakespearean counterargument, and finally, Section 5, where you'll get to write your own synkrisis. Section 1, the serpent and the bear. Think of this whole thing like a heavyweight title fight between two incredibly gifted leaders who, spoiler alert, both eventually turned traitor against their own hometowns. Over in the left corner, we've got the Greek general Alcibiades. He's the flatterer, the slippery, self-indulgent Athenian serpent who leaned hard on base seductions and, frankly, a lot of petulance. Over in the right corner, the Roman general Coriolanus. He's the provoker, the intensely proud, uncompromising, austere Roman bear who operated with this incredible oligarchical haughtiness. They are literal polar opposites in how they tackle the world. Moving on to Section 2, the 7 axes of comparison. Plutarch basically acts as our ringside judge here, scoring these two guys across 7 distinct rounds. Round 1, military ability. Honestly, both showed insane courage and strategic brilliance. It's essentially a draw, but Plutarch gives just a slight edge to Alcibiades for racking up more independent victories. So Alcibiades takes round 1. Then we get to round 2, seeking power. And here's where Plutarch throws us a total curveball. Alcibiades used flattery to climb the ladder, right? Coriolanus used sheer pride. Plutarch actually gives the win to the flatterer. His reasoning is that a flatterer lowers himself to get power, but a fiercely proud man seeks power by contemptuously lowering everyone else. Definitely didn't see that coming, but round 2 goes to Alcibiades. The pace really picks up in round 3, provoking war. Now, both these guys instigated conflicts. Alcibiades totally broke a peace treaty, which is bad, but he actually secured real strategic alliances for Athens in the process. Coriolanus, on the other hand, literally spread false rumors to start a war purely to satisfy his own personal rage. Plutarch rightly decides that's a whole lot worse. Round 3, Alcibiades. Round 4 looks at exile behavior. When things went south, both men turned on their cities. But when Athens finally said, hey, come back, Alcibiades relented and served his city again. Coriolanus? No way. He refused all the diplomats, all the priests. He just wanted to watch Rome burn. So round 4 goes to Alcibiades. Then we hit round 5, which exposes a massive, glaring contradiction in Coriolanus. He absolutely despised the common people of Rome and flat out refused to court their favor. But then he was completely furious when they wouldn't give him top honors. Plutarch nails this by saying, he who least likes courting favor ought also least to think of resenting neglect. I mean, you can't refuse to play the game and then get outraged when you don't win the trophy, right? The dysfunction was in him, not Rome. Round 5 to Alcibiades. But wait a second, because the momentum completely shifts here in these final 2 categories. Round 6 is money. Alcibiades was famous for being wildly corrupt, taking huge bribes, and living large. Coriolanus? Utterly incorruptible. He even turned down piles of cash when his own commanders tried to give it to him as an honorable reward. So round 6 decisively goes to Coriolanus. Round 7 is temperance. Alcibiades was your classic libertine, drinking, partying, the whole 9 yards. Coriolanus was strictly austere, chaste, and incredibly devoted to his mother. When it comes to personal morals, Coriolanus absolutely sweeps the board. He seems like the clear, morally superior guy here. So looking at the final tally, it's a completely fascinating split. Coriolanus utterly dominates the personal and moral categories. As a private citizen, he is brave, he's clean, he's disciplined. But Alcibiades completely owns the political and strategic categories. Despite his massive personal flaws and vices, strategically speaking, Alcibiades is the clear winner on points. Which brings us to Section 3, Plutarch's surprising verdict. Since Coriolanus crushes the moral categories, you'd think he'd be the overall winner, right? Well, Plutarch's ultimate conclusion about who was the better, or at least less damaging leader, is shocking. It goes against every instinct we have. He says, quote, "A man who ingratiates himself by indulgence in flattery is hardly so censurable as one who, to avoid the appearance of flattering, insults." This right here, this is the entire philosophical core of our explainer today. Plutarch is basically telling us that flattery, as gross as it is just a tool. But actively insulting your own people just to protect your fragile pride, that is infinitely more destructive. And that leads us to the hard lesson. Plutarch isn't judging their souls, he's judging their political impact. Which guy does less damage to the community? Surprisingly, it's Alcibiades. Why? Because a vain guy like Alcibiades can always be flattered back into doing his job. But the sheer, unyielding pride of Coriolanus, it couldn't be appeased by anything less than total destruction. I know this totally ruins our romantic image of the principled, uncompromising hero, but Plutarch is arguing that reality requires suppleness. A flawed, vain leader who will actually compromise is way safer for society than an austere hero who'd rather see the whole city burn than bend his knee. Section 4. The Shakespearean counter-argument. Now, history didn't just stop with Plutarch, and not everyone bought into his purely pragmatic math, because here is the massive real-world complication. For all of Plutarch's brilliant theorizing, look at the actual historical receipts. Alcibiades literally cost Athens her entire empire. Coriolanus, for all his terrifying pride, ended up costing Rome absolutely nothing. Why? Because at the very last second, his moral counterweight, his mother, Volmania, begged him to stop, and he actually turned his army around. So the actual physical damage done to their cities was vastly different, which is a fact Plutarch kind of glides over. Check out how this evolves over time. Back in the 1st century, Plutarch is all about the political cost, handing the win to Alcibiades. But jump to 1607, and William Shakespeare writes a whole play framing Coriolanus not as a villain, but as this beautifully tragic figure of inarticulate grandeur, destroyed by his own absolute purity. And by the 20th century, critics like T.S. Eliot and William Hazlitt are holding up Coriolanus as this magnificent defense of aristocracy. Later centuries, fueled by a different moral imagination, actually prefer Coriolanus. They see a guy whose pure virtues, loyalty, hatred of corruption, were what tragically doomed him in a broken political system.
Section 5. Write your own synkrisis.
All right, we've laid out the facts, the raw pragmatism, and the romantic tragedy. Now I'm throwing it over to you. If you had to write your own comparison, your own synkrisis, where would you land? You could dig into the very real political danger of having contempt for the public, or maybe look at their moral anchors. Alcibiades had the great philosopher Socrates trying to keep him in line, while Coriolanus had his formidable mother, Volumnia. Which dynamic actually worked better? You could even explore the nature of their betrayals. When exactly does an unfair exile justify burning down your hometown? Or, just decide who you agree with, Plutarch the pragmatist or Shakespeare the dramatist. So I'm going to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on today. And honestly, it's a question that feels just as relevant right now as it did in ancient Rome. When you're evaluating leaders and the realities of power, which is more dangerous? The man who pretends to love the people or the man who openly does not? Really think about that one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep digging into the history, and I'll see you all next time.